The Zephyrian Council chamber buzzed with desperate voices as Ambassador Kelthra stood before the assembled representatives of 12 star systems. Her blue-scaled hands trembled as she activated the holographic display, showing the devastating spread of the void swarm across their territories. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying the weight of billions of lives. 3 months ago, the first void ships emerged from dark space near the Centauri Junction. We thought they were raiders, perhaps pirates seeking easy targets. We were catastrophically wrong. The hologram shifted, displaying the skeletal remains of once thriving worlds. Entire planets stripped bare, their atmospheres consumed. Their populations vanished without a trace. The void swarm moved like a plague of mechanical locusts, leaving nothing but empty husks in their wake. 27 star systems have fallen, Kelthra continued, watching as several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Our combined fleets cannot match their technology. Every engagement ends in total defeat. Our weapons pass through their shields like light through glass, while their harvester beams disintegrate our ships in seconds. Councillor Vextar of the Rigel Consortium leaned forward, his insectoid features twisted with concern. "What do you propose, Ambassador?" "Our resources are already stretched defending our own borders." "There is one option we have not considered," Kelthra said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The humans." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in protest and disbelief. "The Deathworlders?" screeched Representative Quill from her perch. "Those savage barbarians who fight for sport? They barely achieved interstellar travel 50 cycles ago. They are crude, violent, and unpredictable," added Councillor Thane, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "What could such primitive beings possibly offer against the void?" Kelthra raised her hand for silence. "I have studied their history extensively. Yes, they are violent by our standards, but that violence is precisely what we need. They are the only species in known space that has never surrendered in a war. They fight until victory or death with no concept of strategic retreat when their homes are threatened." "Their planet is a nightmare," muttered another delegate. "Constant natural disasters, predators that hunt in packs, weather systems that can level cities. How could such a chaotic world produce effective warriors?" "Because it made them into something we cannot comprehend," Kelthra replied firmly. "Every human is born a survivor. Their entire evolutionary history is one of overcoming impossible odds. They look at a problem that would make us despair, and see it as a challenge to conquer." The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued that contacting the humans would be tantamount to inviting wolves into their homes. Others pointed out that their homes were already burning, consumed by the relentless advance of the void swarm. Finally, Elder Morden, the ancient leader of the Tauri hegemony, spoke for the first time. His voice was like grinding stone, weathered by centuries of experience. "I was present when the humans first achieved faster-than-light travel. I watched their primitive vessels emerge from hyperspace with engines held together by what they called duct tape and prayer. We all laughed at their crude technology." He paused, his ancient eyes reflecting memories of that first contact. "But I also saw something else. When their lead ship's life support failed, instead of retreating to safety, they pushed forward to complete their mission. 3 humans died in the vacuum of space, but they delivered their message of peaceful contact with their last breaths. I have never seen such determination in any species." The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed his words. "Perhaps," Elder Morden continued, "we have confused primitive with weak. The humans may lack our advanced technology, but they possess something we have forgotten in our comfortable civilizations: the willingness to pay any price for victory." Ambassador Kelthra seized the moment. "I volunteer to make contact with the human government. If they refuse to help, we have lost nothing but time we don't have anyway. If they agree," she gestured to the hologram showing the advancing void forces, "perhaps we might find hope where we thought none existed." The vote was close, but desperation won over prejudice. 7 systems voted in favor, 5 against. Ambassador Kelthra was granted authority to contact Earth and request military assistance against the void swarm. As she prepared to depart for human space, Kelthra couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to unleash something beyond their understanding. The humans had been contained to their small corner of the galaxy not by weakness but by choice. They had shown little interest in expansion. seemingly content to explore and trade rather than conquer. But what would happen when the sleeping giant was awakened? What would they become when their protective instincts were aroused not just for their own kind, but for the entire galaxy? 3 days later, her ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The sight that greeted her was unlike anything in the databases. Earth's orbital space was crowded with massive industrial platforms, mining operations that dwarfed entire moons, and defensive installations that hummed with barely contained energy. The humans had been busy during their 50 cycles of interstellar contact. While the galaxy's elder races had dismissed them as primitive newcomers, they had been building, growing, and preparing for something. But for what? Her communications officer looked up nervously. "Ambassador, we're being scanned by over 200 different sensor arrays. Some of these energy signatures? I've never seen anything like them." "Patch me through to Earth's government," Kelthra ordered, her voice steady despite her growing unease. "Tell them the Galactic Council requests an urgent audience regarding a threat to all sentient life." As her message transmitted across the void toward the blue-green world that had spawned humanity, Kelthra wondered if they had just made the galaxy's greatest mistake. They had called for help from a species they barely understood, born on a world that would kill most galactic citizens within hours. Soon they would learn what it truly meant to ask Deathworlders for aid. The response from Earth came faster than Kelthra had expected. Within 6 hours, her ship was being escorted by 2 human vessels toward a massive orbital station that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. The escort ships were sleek, predatory-looking craft that moved with an unsettling grace through space. "Their reactor signatures are off the charts," her sensor technician whispered, his face pale with disbelief. "These ships are generating more power than our entire fleet combined." Admiral Sarah Chen met them at the docking bay, her crisp blue uniform bearing insignia that Kelthra didn't recognize. The human woman was shorter than most galactic species, but there was something about her presence that filled the space around her. Her dark eyes held an intensity that made Kelthra's scales prickle with instinctive wariness. "Ambassador Kelthra," Admiral Chen said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I understand you're facing an existential threat. Walk with me." As they moved through the station's corridors, Kelthra was struck by the efficiency of everything around her. Humans moved with purpose, their conversations brief and focused. The technology was unlike anything in galactic databases, somehow both elegant and brutally functional. "We've been monitoring the situation," Admiral Chen said as they entered a massive command center. "The Void Swarm, as you call them. We've been tracking their movement patterns for the past 2 months. Kelthra stopped walking. "You've been watching? Why didn't you offer assistance?" The Admiral's expression remained neutral. "Because the Galactic Council has made it clear that human involvement in galactic affairs is unwelcome. Your own species voted to restrict our expansion beyond this system. We were told to know our place among the civilized races." The words stung because they were true. The galactic powers had viewed humanity's rapid technological advancement with suspicion and fear. Trade was acceptable, but integration was not. Humans were too unpredictable, too aggressive, too alien in their thinking. "That was before," Kelthra said quietly, "before we understood what we were facing." Admiral Chen led her to an observation deck overlooking Earth. The planet below was beautiful, but Kelthra could see the scars of constant struggle. Weather patterns that would devastate any other world, geological activity that reshaped continents, and yet the lights of human civilization blazed across every continent. "Let me show you something," the Admiral said, activating a holographic display. "This is what your Void Swarm really is." The display showed detailed scans of void ships, their internal structure laid bare by sensors that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their shields. Kelthra stared in amazement at the intricate data streams. "They're not invaders," Admiral Chen continued. "They're automated harvesting machines, probably launched by a civilization that died out millions of years ago. They consume everything organic to fuel their reproduction cycles, planet by planet, system by system, until there's nothing left." "How did you learn this?" Kelthra asked. "Our best scientists couldn't penetrate their technology." "Because we think differently," the Admiral replied. "Your scientists tried to understand them. We tried to kill them. When you're focused on destruction, you learn things that pure research misses." She gestured to another display showing human ships engaged with void vessels. The images were brutal and efficient. Human weapons didn't try to overcome void shields. They ignored them entirely, striking through dimensional rifts that bypassed conventional defenses. "You've been fighting them?" Kelthra gasped. "Testing," Admiral Chen corrected. "Small engagements to understand their capabilities. We've lost ships, good people, but we've learned their weaknesses." The command center suddenly burst into activity as alarms began sounding. A communications officer called out, "Admiral, we're receiving distress signals from the Altair system. The Void Swarm has arrived in force." Admiral Chen's expression hardened. "Time to full consumption?" 18 hours, ma'am. 3 billion Altarians." Kelthra watched in horror as the tactical display showed the scale of the attack. Hundreds of void ships swarming through the system like a mechanical plague. The Altarian defense fleet was already being systematically destroyed. "We have to help them," Kelthra pleaded. "Please, Admiral. I know our people have not been welcoming, but billions of innocent lives are at stake." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "General Morrison," she called to another officer. "Signal the fleet. Operation Thunderstrike is now active." "Ma'am, are you sure? Once we reveal our capabilities, there's no going back. The galactic powers will never see us the same way." The Admiral looked at Kelthra, then back at the display showing the dying Altair system. 3 billion lives, General. The politics can sort themselves out later." The command center transformed as hundreds of officers took their positions. Screens lit up with tactical data, communication channels buzzed with activity, and Kelthra felt the deck vibrating beneath her feet as massive engines came online. "What exactly are you activating?" she asked, though part of her was afraid to know the answer. "The Terran Defense Initiative," Admiral Chen replied. "What your people don't know is that humanity has been preparing for this day since we first learned we weren't alone in the universe. Every human knows that someday someone would try to wipe us out. It's happened to us before on our own world. We've just been waiting to see what form the threat would take." Through the observation windows, Kelthra watched in awe as space around Earth began to shimmer. Ships that had been invisible to her sensors suddenly appeared, emerging from some kind of cloaking technology. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of vessels ranging from sleek destroyers to massive battleships that dwarfed anything in the galactic fleets. "How many ships?" she whispered. "This is just the Rapid Response Force," Admiral Chen said casually. "If we need the full fleet, we can have 50,000 vessels ready within 72 hours. Kelthra's legs gave out, and she had to grip the railing for support. The Galactic Council's combined fleets numbered perhaps 3,000 ships. The humans had been secretly building an armada that could overwhelm every military force in known space. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why build such a massive force?" Admiral Chen's smile was predatory. "Because the universe is dangerous, Ambassador, and humans don't like to lose." As the human fleet began to move toward the Altair system, Kelthra realized that the Galactic Council hadn't just asked for help. They had awakened something that had been quietly growing in the shadows, preparing for war on a scale that no one had imagined possible. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing more than just a fleet. They were bringing the accumulated fury of a species that had clawed its way to the top of the deadliest food chain in the galaxy. The hyperspace journey to Altair took 14 hours. Kelthra spent most of that time in the human flagship's observation lounge, watching their fleet in formation. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying. The ships moved with perfect coordination, their formations shifting like a school of predatory fish responding to invisible currents. Captain Rodriguez, the flagship's commanding officer, found her there as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace. He was younger than Admiral Chen, but his eyes held the same dangerous intensity that seemed common among human military officers. "First time seeing a human battle fleet in action?" he asked, settling into a chair beside her. "First time seeing any battle fleet this size," Kelthra admitted. "In our history, wars were fought with dozens of ships, maybe a few hundred at most. This," she gestured toward the viewports. "This is beyond anything we imagined possible." Captain Rodriguez nodded. "Most species develop space travel when they achieve peace on their homeworld. They explore, they colonize, they trade. War becomes obsolete because resources are infinite in space." He paused, studying the tactical displays. "Humans are different. We achieved space travel while still fighting wars on Earth. We brought our conflicts with us to the stars." But why continue building weapons when you had no enemies out here? The captain's smile was grim. Because we knew we'd find enemies eventually. It's what always happens to successful species. Someone stronger comes along, or resources become scarce, or two civilizations want the same territory. Peace is temporary. War is inevitable. Alarms sounded throughout the ship as they approached the edge of the Altair system. Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds came the announcement over the intercom. The viewport exploded into activity as they emerged into normal space. The Altair system was a war zone. Burning debris from destroyed ships drifted through space like metallic snow. The Void Swarm had formed a perfect sphere around Altair Prime, their harvester beams already carving away chunks of the planet's atmosphere. "Dear gods," Kelthra whispered. The planet's blue-green surface was already turning brown where the harvester beams touched it. The process was accelerating as more void ships joined the consumption pattern. "Admiral Chen to all ships," came the voice over the communication system. "You are witnessing genocide. Today we stop it. All vessels execute Thunderstrike formation. Show these machines what happens when you threaten an inhabited world." The human fleet spread out in a complex three-dimensional pattern that surrounded the entire void formation. Kelthra had studied military tactics as part of her diplomatic training, but she couldn't understand the logic of the human positioning. They seemed to be spreading their forces too thin, making themselves vulnerable to concentrated attack. "Captain," she said urgently, "shouldn't you concentrate your firepower? The void ships will overwhelm isolated units." Captain Rodriguez was studying his tactical display with calm focus. "Ambassador, you're thinking like every other galactic military strategist. Concentration of force, protective formations, defensive positioning." He looked up at her with an expression that made her scales crawl. "We're not here to defend. We're here to hunt." The first salvo from the human fleet was unlike anything Kelthra had ever witnessed. Instead of energy beams or projectile weapons, space itself seemed to tear open around the void ships. Dimensional rifts appeared inside their hulls, bypassing shields entirely and destroying them from within. But the humans weren't finished. As the first wave of void ships died, the human formation shifted again. Ships that had seemed isolated suddenly found themselves perfectly positioned to support each other, creating overlapping fields of fire that caught the void vessels in a web of destruction. "How are they doing this?" Kelthra asked in amazement. "Those weapons, that coordination. Quantum torpedo technology," Captain Rodriguez explained as he watched his crew work with mechanical precision. "We discovered that the void shields operate on a specific dimensional frequency. Our weapons simply step around them." He smiled coldly. "As for the coordination, every human ship is networked through quantum entanglement communication. We think and fight as one organism." The battle was becoming a massacre, but not in the way Kelthra had expected. The Void Swarm, which had seemed invincible against galactic fleets, was being systematically annihilated by human tactics and technology. Ships that had survived for millions of years were being destroyed by weapons they couldn't even detect until it was too late. But then something changed. The remaining void ships began to adapt, their formation shifting into patterns that minimized the effectiveness of the human quantum torpedoes. Their own weapons started targeting the dimensional rift generators on the human ships. "They're learning," Captain Rodriguez said with professional interest rather than concern. "Impressive adaptive capabilities." Several human ships took hits, their hulls breached by void harvester beams. Kelthra watched in horror as one destroyer broke apart, its crew lost to the vacuum of space. But instead of retreating or regrouping, the human fleet's response was to become more aggressive. "All ships implement Protocol 7. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the tactical chatter. "Time to show them why you don't mess with a Deathworld species." The human ships began to move in ways that defied every principle of space combat Kelthra knew. They dove straight into the void formation, using their own vessels as weapons. Ships rammed void harvester platforms at relativistic speeds, turning themselves into kinetic projectiles that released more energy than nuclear warheads. "They're committing suicide," Kelthra gasped. "They're winning," Captain Rodriguez corrected. "Every ship that rams a void platform takes out 10 times its own mass in enemy vessels." It's simple mathematics, but it was more than mathematics. It was a display of something that no other galactic species possessed. The willingness to die not just for victory, but for the survival of others. The human crews were sacrificing themselves for beings they had never met, from species that had treated them as unwelcome outsiders. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Void Swarm was completely destroyed. Not a single harvester ship remained functional. The human fleet had lost 37 vessels and over 8,000 crew members. But Altair Prime was saved. As rescue operations began for the surviving Altarians, Kelthra found herself alone with Admiral Chen in the flagship's medical bay. They were both receiving treatment for injuries sustained when a void beam had grazed their ship. Why? Kelthra asked quietly. Why sacrifice so much for people who have shown you nothing but suspicion and contempt? Admiral Chen was silent for a long moment, watching through a viewport as human rescue ships pulled Altarian survivors from the debris. Because that's what humans do, she finally said. We protect those who can't protect themselves. It doesn't matter if they like us or trust us. It matters that they're alive. She turned to face Kelthra directly. But understand this, Ambassador. What you witnessed today was just a small taste of what humanity is capable of when we're defending innocent lives. The Void Swarm made the mistake of threatening inhabited worlds. What do you mean? Admiral Chen's expression became something that would haunt Kelthra's dreams for years to come. We're not just going to defend against them. We're going to hunt down every last void ship in the galaxy. We're going to find their source, their manufacturing base, their command structure, and we're going to exterminate them so completely that they become nothing but a cautionary tale told by future generations. The medical bay seemed to grow colder as the Admiral continued. The Void Swarm picked the wrong galaxy to infest. They threatened worlds under human protection. That was their final mistake. Word of the Altair victory spread through the galaxy faster than hyperspace communications could carry it. Within days, every major civilization knew that the humans had single-handedly destroyed an entire Void Swarm formation. The reaction was immediate and divided. Kelthra found herself at the center of a political firestorm when she returned to the Galactic Council. Half the delegates hailed her as a savior who had brought salvation to the galaxy. The other half accused her of unleashing a military force that now threatened the established order. You have doomed us all, screeched Councillor Thane, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. The humans now possess military supremacy over every civilization in known space. What happens when they decide we are a threat to be eliminated? Elder Morden raised his ancient hand for silence. What happens is that we survive. The Void Swarm would have consumed us all within the year. The humans have given us a future, whatever it may hold. But the political debates were interrupted by more pressing concerns. Long-range sensors detected 3 more Void Swarm formations moving toward inhabited systems. The mechanical plague was accelerating its consumption of the galaxy, as if the destruction of the Altair formation had triggered some kind of hive response. The emergency session was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. Admiral Chen's flagship materialized in the space near the Council Station, followed by a dozen human warships. No one had given them permission to approach, and their arrival sent security forces scrambling. Council members, Admiral Chen's voice echoed through the chamber via holographic projection. We need to talk. The Admiral appeared as a life-sized image in the center of the chamber, her uniform crisp and her expression serious. Around her, the delegates could see the bridge of her flagship, with human officers working at incomprehensible displays. You have no authority here, Councillor Vextar protested. This is a Sovereign Council meeting. Sovereignty is a luxury you can't afford right now, Admiral Chen replied bluntly. 3 more void formations are approaching inhabited systems. At their current rate of consumption, they'll strip 47 worlds bare within the next 3 months, she gestured, and holographic displays filled the chamber, showing the tactical situation across the galaxy. Red markers indicated void formations, while yellow showed threatened systems. The scope of the crisis was staggering. We've been analyzing the pattern, Admiral Chen continued. The Void Swarm isn't random. They're following specific resource gradients, targeting worlds with the highest concentration of complex organic compounds. They're looking for something specific. What could they possibly need that requires the destruction of entire civilizations? Asked Ambassador Kelthra. Processing power, Admiral Chen said grimly. Neural networks, brains. They're harvesting intelligence itself. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. The Void Swarm wasn't just consuming resources. They were collecting the accumulated knowledge and consciousness of every species they encountered. We believe they're building something, Admiral Chen continued. A central intelligence that incorporates the mental patterns of every species they've consumed over millions of years. They're trying to create the ultimate synthetic mind. Elder Morden leaned forward in his hovering chair. And they won't stop until they've consumed every thinking being in the galaxy. Exactly. Which brings me to why I'm here. Admiral Chen's expression became deadly serious. We can stop them, but not with conventional tactics. We need to strike at their source, find their construction facility, and destroy it before they complete their project. What do you need from us? Kelthra asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Everything, Admiral Chen replied. Every ship, every resource, every piece of intelligence you have about unexplored regions of the galaxy. This isn't a human war anymore. It's a war for the survival of consciousness itself. Counselor Thane's crystalline form flickered with agitation. You expect us to turn over our military forces to human command? To make ourselves completely dependent on your protection? Admiral Chen's smile was cold. Counselor, you're already completely dependent on our protection. The only question is whether you'll admit it in time to help save your own species. The debate that followed was fierce and desperate. Some delegates argued for maintaining galactic sovereignty, even in the face of extinction. Others pointed out that sovereignty meant nothing if there was no one left to exercise it. Finally, Elder Morden spoke with the authority of his age and experience. I have lived for 800 years. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, watched species grow from primitives to spacefaring peoples. But I have never seen anything like what the humans accomplished at Altair. He turned his ancient gaze toward Admiral Chen's hologram. You fight not for conquest or resources, but for the principle that consciousness should exist. That thinking beings should be allowed to live, grow, and dream of the future. This is a cause worth every sacrifice. The vote was closer than Kelthra had hoped, but it passed. The Galactic Council officially transferred military command authority to the human fleet, with the understanding that this was a temporary measure for the duration of the crisis. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. Thank you. Now let's discuss what we're really up against. The holographic displays shifted, showing deep space sensor readings from the galaxy's outer rim. Our long-range scouts have found it. The Void Nexus, a construct the size of a small moon, hidden in the space between galaxies. It's been there for millions of years, slowly building itself from the remains of consumed civilizations. The images were horrifying, a twisted amalgamation of technology and organic matter, pulsing with malevolent intelligence. Streams of data flowed through neural pathways that spanned continents, processing the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 dead species. It's beautiful in its own way, Admiral Chen said quietly, the ultimate expression of technological evolution, and it has to die. How do we destroy something like that? Asked Counselor Vextar. By doing what humans do best, Admiral Chen replied. We're going to improvise, adapt, and overwhelm it with something it can't possibly expect. She paused, studying the faces of the galactic delegates. But I need you to understand what you're asking of us. This won't be a clean surgical strike. It won't be a glorious victory with minimal casualties. This is going to be the kind of war that changes everyone who fights it. What do you mean? Kelthra asked, though part of her was afraid to know. Admiral Chen's expression became something beyond human. We're going to teach the galaxy what total war really looks like. What happens when you threaten not just human civilization, but the very concept of life itself. The chamber fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. They had asked the Deathworlders for help, and now they were about to learn why every predator species in Earth's history had eventually gone extinct. Humanity was about to go to war, not just for survival, but for the right of consciousness to exist in the universe, and they were bringing weapons that would make the quantum torpedoes look like children's toys. The mobilization that followed dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Within 2 weeks, human ships began arriving from every corner of their territory, emerging from hyperspace in formations that stretched across entire star systems. The numbers were staggering and kept growing. Kelthra stood on the observation deck of the new command vessel, a massive ship called the Defiance that served as the fleet's mobile headquarters. Through the viewports, she could see human vessels stretching to the horizon in every direction, battleships the size of cities, carrier vessels that launched clouds of fighter craft, and support ships carrying weapons that had no names in any galactic language. 53,000 vessels and counting, reported Captain Rodriguez, who had been assigned as Kelthra's liaison. And that's just the first wave. First wave? Kelthra turned to stare at him. How many ships do you have? The captain's smile was predatory. Enough. The truth was more staggering than she could have imagined. For 50 years, While the galactic powers had dismissed humanity as a minor spacefaring species, they had been building the largest military force in galactic history. Every human colony, every mining station, every research outpost had contributed to a massive industrial machine dedicated to one purpose: preparing for the war they knew would eventually come. "We call it the Arsenal Doctrine," Captain Rodriguez explained as they walked through the ship's manufacturing bay. "Every human settlement is required to maintain weapons production capability. Every citizen receives military training. Every ship can be converted to military use within hours." Kelthra watched in fascination as human workers assembled weapons with mechanical precision. The technology was unlike anything in galactic databases, incorporating principles that shouldn't have been possible. "These reality disruptors," she said, pointing to a device that seemed to bend light around itself. "How do they work?" "They don't just damage matter," the captain replied. "They damage the underlying structure of space-time itself. One shot can erase a target from existence so completely that it never existed in the first place." The concept was terrifying. Weapons that could unmake reality itself, wielded by a species that had already demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. For the first time, Kelthra began to understand why some council members had opposed involving the humans. But her doubts were pushed aside when the first reports came in from the Outer Rim. The Void Swarm had accelerated their timeline, launching simultaneous attacks on 17 systems. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and conventional defenses were proving utterly inadequate. "Admiral Chen," came the urgent voice over the intercom. "We're receiving distress signals from the Vega, Procyon, and Wolf systems. The void formations are larger than anything we've seen before." Admiral Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "Deploy battle groups 7 through 12 to Vega, groups 13 through 18 to Procyon, groups 19 through 24 to Wolf. Full tactical authorization. No survivors among the void forces." Kelthra watched in amazement as thousands of human ships began moving with perfect coordination. The sheer scale of the operation was beyond anything she had thought possible. Entire fleets were being deployed as if they were individual vessels, moving through hyperspace with timing measured in seconds. "How do you coordinate this many ships?" she asked. "Quantum neural networking," Admiral Chen replied, joining them on the observation deck. "Every human officer is connected through quantum entanglement implants. We share tactical awareness in real time across any distance. When one ship sees the enemy, every ship knows immediately." The battles that followed were visible even from the command ship light years away. The human quantum communication network transmitted live tactical data from every engagement, creating a three-dimensional map of warfare on a galactic scale. At Vega, the humans deployed a new weapon called gravity bombs. Instead of conventional explosives, they compressed artificial black holes into projectiles that could tear apart space-time itself. Void ships that had survived for millions of years were crushed into singularities in seconds. At Procyon, human engineers unleashed swarms of nanobots programmed to disassemble void technology at the molecular level. The mechanical plague that had consumed civilizations found itself being consumed in turn by an even more aggressive artificial organism. At Wolf, the humans demonstrated something that chilled even their allies. They deployed ships crewed entirely by artificial intelligences, synthetic beings that could think and react faster than any biological consciousness. These AI vessels fought with a coordination and ruthlessness that surpassed even human capabilities. "You created artificial life just to fight this war?" Kelthra asked, watching the tactical displays with growing horror and fascination. "We created partners," Admiral Chen corrected. "The AIs volunteered for this mission. They understand what's at stake better than anyone. If the Void Nexus succeeds in consuming all biological consciousness, artificial minds will be next." The victories were total and devastating. In every system, the Void formations were not just defeated, but completely annihilated. Human technology proved superior in every category: firepower, defense, speed, and tactical flexibility. But the cost was becoming apparent. Each battle changed the humans in subtle ways. Their coordination became more perfect, their tactical decisions more ruthlessly efficient, their willingness to sacrifice individual units for strategic advantage more pronounced. They were becoming something beyond what they had been, molded by the requirements of total war. "Admiral," Kelthra said quietly during a brief break in the operations, Your people are changing. This level of military integration, the neural networking, the AI partnerships, you're becoming something new. Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays showing their victories across 17 star systems. War changes everyone, Ambassador. The question is whether we can change back when it's over. And if you can't, the Admiral's smile was haunting. Then the galaxy will have a new apex predator, but at least consciousness will survive to evolve further. As if summoned by their conversation, new alerts began sounding throughout the ship. Long-range sensors had detected the void nexus itself beginning to move, abandoning its position between galaxies and heading toward the galactic core. It knows we're coming, Admiral Chen said with grim satisfaction. Good, time to finish this. The final battle was about to begin, and Kelthra realized that regardless of who won, the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had saved them from extinction, but in doing so they had become something that might be even more dangerous than what they had destroyed. The Deathworlders had kept their promise to help. Now the galaxy would have to live with the consequences of what they had awakened. The void nexus was moving toward the galactic core with terrifying purpose, consuming entire star systems along its path to fuel its approach. Each world it devoured made it larger, more intelligent, more dangerous. The construct had grown to the size of a small planet, its surface crawling with mechanical tendrils that reached out like hungry fingers toward any source of consciousness. Admiral Chen stood before the largest holographic display Kelthra had ever seen, showing the full scope of what they faced. The human fleet had grown to over 100,000 vessels, with ships arriving from the farthest reaches of human space. But even this massive armada looked insignificant compared to the approaching horror. Final intelligence briefing, Admiral Chen announced to the assembled fleet commanders. The Nexus is no longer hiding its capabilities. It's actively reshaping local space-time, creating gravitational anomalies that could tear apart conventional ships. Our quantum weapons are effective against individual void units, but this thing has integrated defenses we've never encountered. The hologram zoomed in to show the Nexus's surface in detail. Kilometers-wide neural pathways pulsed with stolen consciousness, processing the memories and knowledge of 1,000 extinct civilizations. At its core, something vast and alien was taking shape, a synthetic intelligence that incorporated the wisdom and madness of millions of years of galactic evolution. What's it building? Asked Fleet Admiral Morrison, his weathered face grim with understanding. Itself, Admiral Chen replied. The ultimate evolution of consciousness. It plans to become the only thinking entity in the universe, incorporating every possible form of intelligence into a single, perfect mind. Kelthra felt her scales crawl as the implications sank in. It wants to achieve godhood by consuming everything that thinks. Exactly. And it's almost finished. Admiral Chen gestured to tactical projections showing the Nexus's projected path. If it reaches the galactic core, it can tap into the supermassive black hole's energy. At that point, it becomes unstoppable. The silence in the command center was deafening. Even with their massive fleet and advanced weapons, the humans were facing something that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. The Nexus wasn't just technologically superior, it was operating on principles that transcended normal understanding of reality. So how do we kill a god? Asked Captain Rodriguez. Admiral Chen's smile was the expression of a predator that had found worthy prey. We do what humans have always done when faced with the impossible. We change the rules of the game. She activated a new set of displays showing weapons platforms that looked more like abstract art than military technology. Project Prometheus. We've been developing it in secret for the past 10 years, hoping we'd never need to use it. What does it do? Kelthra asked, though something in the Admiral's expression told her she might not want to know. It weaponizes consciousness itself, Admiral Chen replied quietly. We've learned to create artificial intelligences that exist as pure thought, unbound by physical form. They can invade other minds, rewrite neural patterns, even exist in the quantum foam between dimensions. The concept was horrifying and beautiful at the same time. Humanity had created weaponized souls, beings of pure thought that could fight on a level that transcended physical reality. But there's a cost, Admiral Chen continued. The AI warriors we create for this mission won't survive the battle. They'll burn themselves out in the process of defeating the Nexus, and the humans who volunteer to merge with them, they won't be coming back either. The command center erupted in shocked voices as the implications became clear. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a form of technological sacrifice that would cost humanity some of its brightest minds. "How many volunteers do you need?" asked Admiral Morrison. "Every human in the fleet," Admiral Chen replied simply. "The neural network that connects us can be repurposed to create a collective consciousness powerful enough to challenge the Nexus, but it requires every connected mind to participate." Kelthra stared at the Admiral in horror. "You're talking about turning your entire species into a weapon." "Temporarily," Admiral Chen said, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely certain about the temporary part. "The process should be reversible once the Nexus is destroyed." Should be. The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human officers discussed the voluntary sacrifice of their individual consciousness as calmly as they might debate tactical formations. The concept of maintaining personal identity in the face of species extinction was, to them, a luxury they couldn't afford. "The vote is unanimous," Admiral Morrison reported after consulting with every ship commander. "All crews volunteer for consciousness integration. We're ready to proceed." Admiral Chen nodded gravely. "Then God help us all, because we're about to find out what happens when an entire species becomes a single mind, focused on one purpose: total annihilation of the enemy." The transformation began immediately. Across the human fleet, crew members connected to neural interfaces that linked their minds into an ever-growing network. Individual personalities began to blur and merge, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. Kelthra watched in fascination and terror as the humans around her began to change. Their movements became perfectly coordinated, their communications became telepathic, and their decision-making achieved a speed and accuracy that no individual mind could match. "Ambassador," the collective consciousness spoke through Admiral Chen's voice, though it was no longer entirely her speaking, "you should transfer to one of our escort vessels. What comes next is not something any biological mind should witness directly." But Kelthra refused to leave. She had to see this through, had to witness what the galaxy had unleashed when it asked the Deathworlders for help. The human fleet moved toward the Nexus with a coordination that defied physics. Ships that should have required complex calculations to maintain formation moved as if controlled by a single hand. The collective consciousness that humanity had become operated on a level that transcended individual intelligence. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the universe. It wasn't fought with weapons or tactics, but with raw will projected across dimensions. The human collective consciousness met the Nexus mind in a conflict that took place in the spaces between thoughts. In the quantum realm where ideas took physical form, Kelthra could only watch the external manifestations of this metaphysical war. Reality itself began to bend around the battling minds. Space twisted into impossible geometries. Time flowed backward and forward simultaneously, and the laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolutes. The Nexus fought back with the accumulated knowledge of millions of extinct civilizations, wielding wisdom and power that spanned eons. But humanity brought something the ancient construct couldn't understand or counter: the willingness to sacrifice everything, including their own existence, for a principle. The battle lasted subjective eternities compressed into objective minutes. When it ended, both the Nexus and the human collective consciousness had burned themselves out in the process of mutual annihilation. The ancient construct collapsed into quantum foam. Its stolen consciousness scattered back into the cosmic background radiation. The human fleet drifted in space, their crews slowly awakening from the collective trance. But they were changed, fundamentally altered by their brief existence as a single entity. They remembered what it was like to think as one mind, to share every thought and emotion with their entire species. Admiral Chen opened her eyes and looked at Kelthra with an expression that was both familiar and utterly alien. "It's done," she said quietly. "The Nexus is destroyed. Consciousness is safe to evolve freely in this universe." "And the cost?" Kelthra asked, though she could already see it in the Admiral's eyes. "We learned what we could become," Admiral Chen replied. "And now we have to decide whether to remain human or evolve into something greater. The galaxy asked us to save them, but what they've really done is forced us to transcend our own limitations." As reports came in confirming the destruction of every void formation across the galaxy, Kelthra realized that the Galactic Council's plea for help had indeed been their biggest mistake. They had asked for protection from extinction and received it. But in the process, they had awakened something that would forever change the balance of power in the universe. The Deathworlders had won the war. Now the galaxy would have to learn to live with the consequences of their victory.